Show.
Welcome to the Bobby O Show. My name is Bob Opotzner, and I have a jam-packed, I hope interesting show for you today. May 1 is an important day for many reasons, but for lawyers and for, I think, the American society, it's important because it's significantly called Law Day. It's a designated day to think about the rule of law, which is a very important aspect of our democracy and our experience in democracy for the last 250 years almost. And in Danbury, I spent actually as a member of the Danbury Bar Association. I ran the show, the Law Day show for many years, and it's a big deal in Danbury. We have on the first Friday of each month, each May, we have students come to the courthouse and walk around the courthouse, meet the marshals, etc. We have a discussion in the morning with one judge in particular giving a speech talking about Law Day. And we also have a situation where there are certain awards that are given out in the Law Day activities to honor certain people. The theme this year of Law Day was Voices of Democracy Shaping the Future, which my guest Richard Kent and I will be talking about in a few moments. But that was a very appropriate theme, especially what's going on in our country in the last several weeks, especially with the college campuses, et cetera. But I first want to honor those three people who won awards today in the Law Day presentation at the courthouse. There's something called the Liberty Bell, which is an award given to someone who's not a lawyer, but who has contributed significantly to the rule of law in Connecticut and the United States. And that was given to Nancy Balwig, who is part of the Corporation Counsel office in Danbury. So congratulations, Nancy. We have the Pro Bono Award. Pro bono in the court system parlance is that people do voluntary things for organizations. It doesn't mean you let a client not pay his bill or her bill, but it's a matter of you take people who are indigent or have a particular social need or whatever you decide is appropriate. And some lawyers give a lot of time to pro bono work. I'm proud to say my law firm Collins Hannafin got the award several years ago, but this year the recipient was Colleen Joyce with Ward Mizuko's law firm. Congratulations, Colleen. And finally, my favorite is the American Dream Award. And that award essentially is people who are not born in the United States but become naturalized citizens and succeed in doing something positive in our society get an award. And this year went to Vasiliki Philippakos, who's a lawyer who was born in Greece, and she won the award this year. So congratulations to all of the three of you in what you do for our society on the rule of law. Richard Kent, Bob Opotzner. How you doing, Richard?
Good, Bob. How are you?
Fine, thank you, Richard. Richard, you may recall, was on our show a couple months ago or so, involved with, he was participating in the Nikki Haley campaign, and Richard's an attorney who's practiced law for many, many years. We were attorneys together in opposition, and we've been friends forever. And Richard and I are going to talk a little bit about that theme of Voices of Democracy Shaping the Future, and in light of the campus problems and other aspects of our society. But I wanted to start with reading the First Amendment of the Constitution, because people, I think, don't understand what the First Amendment means. And Richard and I will talk about that. I'm going to have you, Richard, open up after I read the short language. First Amendment, fundamental freedoms. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And the important part of that First Amendment, Congress cannot do certain things. And then it's been interpreted by case law that other governmental agencies cannot prohibit those aspects of our First Amendment. And Richard, when you have Columbia University, which is a private institution, versus the University of Connecticut, Are there different standards that you think might apply to a private school like Columbia versus a public school like University of Connecticut?
Well, I think trespass is certainly an issue. Protesters, and by the way, I don't know anything that took place at UConn, but stuff certainly did take place at state universities like Rutgers and Michigan, and the police can come right in to those facilities. But at a private school like Columbia, like NYU, the university needs to call in the police before something happens. And something really egregious happened at Columbia a few nights ago at Alexander Hamilton Hall. And I don't know that in my long life that I've ever been more exercised or exorcised about an event that took place in this country. I'm going to throw in January 6th also, which was horrendous. But what I saw at Columbia and then what I saw that evening at Columbia just was mind-boggling to me.
Richard, we're going to get to that, what you saw in a moment or two, but I think the point we're both making theoretically is that there's a distinction to what may happen under the law in a private university and a public university. And as an aspect of my career, aside from my litigation practice, I did a lot of disciplinary actions for students, some involving college students. And the rules that we faced in the college student situation to suspend a student in a college or a private school or different situations. Richard, tell us, please, as I understand it, you were on the campus of Columbia University very recently. Tell me where, when, and how, what happened.
Yeah, sure. I had lunch with a former member of the Board of Trustees on Monday in New York. And then I drove a little bit up to campus, double parked my car, and I walked around. And I saw sights that I didn't think I would see on a college campus, in New York, or in the United States. I heard epithets being just, I mean, they were coming out of people's mouths about Jews, about anti-Semitism, about Israel. I saw signs with abhorrent language on those signs. And I said to myself, and I actually said to my wife when I got home, I bet a third or 40% of these people aren't even Columbia students. And another half of the other 60% had no idea what they were even protesting.
When I was at Yale back in the early mid-70s, I guess it was, there was a big controversy my senior year. A gentleman named William Shockley, I don't even know if he's alive anymore. William Shockley wrote a very horrifying report saying that African-American students or African-Americans were innately less intelligent than Caucasians. Terrible, terrible, not well researched, but just terrible report. And he was invited by some very conservative organization. And we did have there were some very conservative groups on campus. He was invited to speak at the university, and the campus became divided between the concept of free speech allotment versus racism. And there was a lot of student petitions and protests, and we ended up, he wasn't able to speak. He was shouted down, etc. But my point is, I saw nothing that was in any way, shape, or form violent. Nothing at all. This situation we've seen now, Richard, that you saw in Columbia and many other colleges, UCLA last couple of nights, University of California, Los Angeles, you're seeing violence. I happen to think that, you may agree or disagree, Richard, I think what happened on January 6th has influenced tremendously what people think they can do in a protest. Like I saw in Columbia on TV, I was watching, they were breaking the windows of some buildings and things. Do you think that January 6th has had any kind of impact, and the protocol and format being used for these kinds of on-campus activities?
I am not competent to draw that analogy. Obviously, the scenes that we saw at Alexander Hamilton Hall were very reminiscent of the scenes that we saw at the United States Capitol. But we've already seen, and the New York City police have found notes from far-left anarchist groups, and I've seen mention of, I don't know if it's accurate or inaccurate, about Antifa being involved. So it is not the same people. It is people on the absolute other end of the spectrum. But in terms of some of the mechanisms and devices that they use to get into a building, yes, there is a similarity there.
Your comment about whether the students who were protesting were students or outside agitators or whatever is a very interesting point. Also, the comment I think you made is, do people really know who are protesting? What are we protesting about? Is someone protesting because they have an grievance in general, or is it on this particular issue? And it made me laugh and cry when I heard that one of the demands at one of the university was by some of the protesters, we want food, we're hungry. And I mean, give me a break. There's a book that was written, I don't know if you read it, Richard, many years ago by Abe Fortas, who wrote a book called Civil Disobedience. And civil disobedience is part of our country, but you have to take the consequence if you're going to do civil disobedience. Any comments what I just said, Richard?
First of all, I'm familiar with the book, but I want to ask this question, Bob. If the epithets that I heard being screamed both on television and in person were directed at a minority other than the Jewish population, let's say the LGBT population or a minority racial group, do you really think that the police wouldn't have moved in quicker, that the cable news stations wouldn't have been more outraged? Jews in this whole situation have been painted by so many different groups as oppressors that it seems like it's okay to say, go back to Poland. I don't even have the words for it, Bob. I'm just saying that I think, and I'm Jewish and you're Jewish, I think when it comes to Jews, there's a double standard. And even Al Sharpton on MSNBC this morning said, there's a moral equivalency that I really can't put up with. The fact that January 6th was called, and it is the most horrible event ever, and people are sympathizing with what happened at places like Alexander Hamilton Hall, which on certain levels is equally as abhorrent.
Richard, I did a show about a month after the October 7th horrific activities in Israel when Hamas killed 1,400 more or less Israelis, Jewish people, whatever. I'm not sure the breakdown exactly, and hostages of 140 or 50 were taken. And we had Sidney Horowitz, who's someone you know very well, Richard, a psychologist, was on the show. And even at that point in time, we discussed the fact that civilians being killed and harmed is not the way to go. It's not the way to go. And I'm not thrilled, quite frankly, with the way the Israeli government, I call him Bibi, has run this activity in response to that. But conversely, I don't understand when I'm watching, and I'm a big follower of MSNBC, which I know you're not as big a fan of, where I saw the other night a congresswoman was given 10 minutes of time to speak, and no one asked her when she was talking about the Palestinian movement. No one said to her, oh, by the way, did you come out against what happened on October 7th? Did you come out against the fact that we still don't have the 140 some hostages back? No one asked that question. So there are a lot of issues that have to be dealt with, which is number one, I think the media, you are correct, Richard, there takes a different perspective. To answer your question, whether it would have been a different response, I don't want to paint all police officers and all police departments and all colleges and all media with one broad brush. But I certainly believe that there are some groups who they've been attacked would have gotten more moral outrage than has been the anti-Semitism shown in these protests on campus. And I think for many people, there's a lot of anti-Semitism that's existed for 2,000 some odd years that people use this situation in Israel now as an excuse.
So somebody said to me, and I haven't done it yet, but I will, Google anti-Semitism in any century, 5th century, 7th century, 19th century, and you're going to come up with volumes and volumes and volumes about it.
You know, I was looking, I turned my shoulder. This is my library, and I've read most of the books behind me. I was just trying to remember the name of the book I read that talked about the way Jews were treated in like the 1500s or 1600s. And the year may be wrong, and maybe next time I do a show with you, I'll have the book in front of me. But essentially, Jews were denied education. Jews were denied the right to have any kind of rights whatsoever. And I think that's a lot of Jewish people tend to be very interested in education. And I think it developed from way back when. So there have been anti-Semitism activities for decades and centuries, et cetera. But it's not just Jewish people who have had those kinds of negativism towards their group, race, religion, or creed, whatever. In fact, the rule of law, getting back to Law Day, talks about the fact, in fact, the judge Sadi, who's a local Superior Court judge in Connecticut, who said he was an Arab background and was born in an Arab Middle Eastern country, talked about those kinds of issues where people in America don't, these are not his words, my perspective, what he said, we Americans who were born America, we don't necessarily appreciate what we have in terms of freedoms versus people in the rest of the world. And many times the people who come over from another country and are naturalized, the mayor of Danbury, Roberto Ayala, talked about the fact that he was born elsewhere and came over. And I was thinking about how we as Americans don't appreciate. You want to protest in Colombia? Fine. Protest the right way. Do the right way. But don't support Hamas when Hamas's plan is to get rid of Israel and kill Jews.
I agree with that sentiment 100%. I mean, when we hear chants about from the river to the sea, and we know that that's really code for annihilating Israel, it's just not something you want to hear as a Jewish American or even as an American, in my point of view.
My wife Wendy's aunt Bernice Tannenbaum, who lived to about the age of 100 more or less, was the international president, I think was her title, of Hadassah. Hadassah is a women's organization that essentially does good deeds. And she by being in that position, she actually got a major award where she was honored along with the Israeli astronaut who got killed many, many years ago. And even way back since I met her, I got married many years ago, Aunt Bernice, we call her, talked about the two-state solution. The two-state solution, which means essentially having separate territories for Palestinians, and separate territories for Israel. But the perspective always, from my view, has been there has to be a two-state solution, not just involving Israel and Palestinians. But I've always said, for example, the Saudis need to give the Palestinian people some oil wells so they can have an economy going, and that all have to contribute. I believe that, I'm just my opinion, that October 7th happened for many reasons, which the invasion of Hamas into Israel. Part of it was that there were some big radicals, very, very radical people in the Hamas and Hezbollah movements who were afraid that there was some movement to having peace in the Mideast. God forbid there should be peace in the Mideast. And a lot of people believe, and I believe, that what happened on October 7th with the mass massacre of Jews and Israelis was because of the fear by some groups, like I mentioned, who did not want peace in the Mideast. Comments, Richard?
Yeah, they were really concerned about the alliance between Saudi Arabia and Israel and also Jordan as well. And they were threatened by it. There's no doubt that was one of the conditions, one of the preconditions to what transpired.
Going from what is a very serious topic that Richard and I and many others, and I have some shows planned in the future, including someone from Israel going to be on our show, on my show. This topic could be discussed for hours, but I want to transition to something that's perhaps much less important than what we just talked about, but still deals with freedoms and rights of individuals. And that goes to college basketball and college sports, which Richard and I are, if you've seen us before on the shows together, are big fans of college sports. Well, I'm less of a fan now than I have been from many years back. And that's because of the intersection of athletes' rights and the interests of college basketball in general. So, Richard, do you want to comment to start us off on what's going on the college scene in sports with respect to name, image, and likeness and other related activities?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about individual liberties and individual rights, and I think I'm on the opposite end when it relates to college athletes, because this is really payback for what didn't happen for the last 50, 75 years. The name, image, and likeness of college athletes being utilized by networks, being utilized in arenas, and there being no just compensation for the student athletes when some of the coaches, like the coach K at Duke, a friend of mine, is earning $9 or $10 million off of the backs of a lot of these players. So when Ed O'Bannon saw his likeness on a video game, he went to a lawyer, and the whole ball of wax started to roll in 2015, 2016, culminating in Brett Kavanaugh's decision. Excellent decision, by the way, a 9-0 decision by the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court couldn't agree 9-0 that today is Friday, but they agreed that student athletes should receive, and I emphasize these words, additional educational benefits. And that now has been taken and run with to the extent of a college athlete transferring from Arizona to Ohio State, a basketball player named Ballo, Ballo, and receiving reportedly $1.2 million. And there's been a lot of $1 million deals. So that is, let's say, payback for many, many, many years. But there's a case pending right now that's about to be settled by the NCAA called House versus NCAA, in which there's apparently going to be a $3.2 billion settlement, which is going to give back money to student athletes going back 3 years, and is also going to force the hands of the TV networks and the universities and the NCAA to permit revenue sharing among the Power 6 schools and the student athletes to the tune of $18 to $20 million per school. And we're going to see that in 2 or 3 years.
Rich, let me stop you right here because you've hit a lot of very important points. First of all, I want to say this. I don't have a problem with, just like I as a lawyer and you as a lawyer, we have a right to charge what the market will bear for our services, and the better lawyer will get more money than the lesser lawyer often. Location makes a difference, whatever. So I don't have a problem with, I'll give you an example. Everyone who watches the show knows I'm a Duke basketball fan and a Yale fan because those are my schools. And both schools have different conferences and different rules that they follow. But having said that, people also know that I'm not a Carolina fan. However, I will say this. Armando Bacot, who has been a player for 5 years for Carolina, is on TV for, I don't want to mention the product, but he's on TV and he talks and he acts like Taylor Swift might act in a commercial she would do. I have no problem whatsoever with a college basketball player, for example, getting paid for his name, image, and likeness in a legitimate deal like that. What I do have a problem with is this, and that is, in fact, I talked to a friend of mine named John Jowdy, who's a lawyer in Danbury. We spoke about this today. He's a Wake Forest guy. And we're both saying, I love to have a student athlete choose Duke over Wake Forest or Wake Forest over Duke because they have a program at one school the other one doesn't have, or they like the campus, or they like this, or their dad or mom went there. That's, maybe I'm being in utopia, but that's what I'd like to see happen. What I don't want to see is, and I know you're actively involved in the collectives and that kind of thing, which you'll explain that in a few moments, but I don't want to see the kid you just mentioned, who's a great ball player, going from Arizona University to Ohio State because he got a deal for 1.6 there versus 1.3 some other school. If you want to be a pure professional athlete, NBA, go join the National Basketball Association. Go join a professional league. And people might say that, well, college basketball is sort of a professional league, but it's not as direct as it is now. And P.S., when I talked at the start of the show about the big picture, I don't see why, and Richard and I have argued this point before, if you're going to have these kinds of payments to the student athletes, why can't a college decide, you know what, we're going to only have profit-making sports. So if our cross-country team costs us $100,000 a year of negative money, but the women's basketball team at UConn makes $100,000, I'm using that as hypothetical, then we'll keep the UConn women's basketball team, but not the cross-country team. Ends up that you would have fewer sports, fewer student athletes benefiting. So that's where the whole point of me first, what's my rights versus the betterment of the entire sport system. So Richard, pick and choose what you want to talk about. We have like 4 minutes left.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And I think one of the unfortunate byproducts of all of this is going to be the elimination of what we call the Olympic sports, the track and field, the cross country, the swimming and diving, the tennis and the golf. I think by virtue, when we're talking about a $20 million payment from Ohio State, let's say, to a variety of student athletes in the revenue sports, such as football and basketball and the like, we're going to have a situation in which they simply can't afford to have 23, 24, 25 sports on campus. And we're going to see a lot of student athletes miss out because their sports, which we generically call the Olympic sports, are going to get cut. And I think that's awful.
You know, we talked about the Yale versus Duke situation. The Ivy League, which Yale is a participant in, Duke's in the ACC, Atlantic Coast Conference. There were certain differences as to what could happen on the COVID year. When obviously the COVID year was because of COVID outbreak. In fact, I was at the end of the ACC basketball tournament watching the Carolina-Syracuse game when it was announced that there may not be a game. The tournament was going to stop, and it did stop. Well, the NCAA allowed some rights to people to have a COVID year, which means an extra year of playing sports. And there was a difference between what you could do in the Ivy League than what you could do in some other leagues. And so there's a lot of different factors to be considered. But if we're going to have Yale beat Auburn, we had Coach Jones on after the Yale-Auburn victory, you're not going to see that kind of activity happening because they're going to end up taking 68 teams, in my opinion, from the tournament to 72 to 95, whatever you're going to do. But what you're going to end up happening is you won't get the second place team from the Ivy League. This year would have been Brown, technically speaking, but you're going to get the 12th best team in the Big Ten. And that is not good for sports as a whole. Richard, we have about 2 minutes left. Why don't you take a minute or two, or a minute more or less, to tell us what do you see as happening in the big picture in the near future in college sports? You mentioned a couple things already, but what do you see happening in college sports before I return? Actually, there's a minute left, so you got 30 seconds.
Well, we haven't talked about the elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room is football, because football drives the bus. And I think the schools that don't have a football program and don't have a football program which brings in a tremendous amount of revenue, are really going to be second-class citizens. I mean, right now, UConn basketball, men's and women's, is the absolute epicenter. But UConn does not have a strong football program because they're not in a conference. And if UConn doesn't get into a conference, and I do see them getting into the ACC conference in the next 2 or 3 years, all of their sports programs are going to suffer. So I think we're going to see revenue sharing, but the revenue sharing is going to be derivative of the football and major power basketball programs. And I think a lot of the other schools are going to suffer as a result of that.
As a ACC member team, Duke, I would love to see UConn in the ACC. There are a lot of political reasons why they have not been invited, but it's about time UConn did get invited. And I was thrilled to see Duke play at UConn this year in football. Although I got to the game 5 minutes before it started, and for $35 or $40, I had a seat midfield, second row. And what does that tell you if there's that much room available? UConn is going to be hurting if their football program holds them back in sports. Richard Kent, it's always a pleasure having you on the show. You've been on for multifaceted topics. You'll be on the show again soon. I want to thank you very much. And I want to remind people, Law Day is very important because of the rule of law being applied to all of us equally. Thank you very much. This has been Bob Opatzner on The Bobby O Show.